Hello friends, and welcome to today's Sutta class. Today we are reading the Simile of the mountain, but before we start, as usual, we will chant the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone to today's Sutta class. Today we are reading the Pabbatūpamasutta from the Samyutta Nikaya, also called the Simile of the mountain. So probably most of you will be familiar with this simile, and it's also a fairly short sutta. So today might be a fairly short sutta study, but we'll see. Maybe there will be a longer discussion. So I picked this sutta because I thought it's just really very relevant to things that are happening at the moment in the world, and many people feel quite affected by pandemics and by wars and other things that are going on. So I felt like this is a really useful sutta to read. And that's why I picked this sutta. So I have put a link in the live chat to Bhante Sujato's translation. I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. And let's just get started. This is a sutta from the Kosala Samyutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. So Samyutta is a chapter. So this is a chapter about Kosala, or specifically about King Pasenadi of Kosala. And King Pasenadi, of course, was a follower of the Buddha, but he was also a king, and he was not a stream enterer. He was just a very ordinary practitioner, still enjoying very much his lay life, his kingly duties, and also all the pleasures that come with his kingship and all the wealth and enjoyments that he has as a king. But still, we know that from time to time, he came to see the Buddha and he was discussing like urgent matters, or he was discussing relevant things that were happening in his kingdom or experiences that he made, and he got some input from the Buddha and he got some teachings. So he was a lay follower, but he wasn't like a very, very advanced practitioner. He was a fairly typical lay person at the time, still enjoying family life and enjoying worldly activities, while also practicing Dhamma a little bit. So, and for that reason, the Buddha gives him a teaching that he can apply it's very easy to apply also in lay life. And in this chapter about King Pasenadi of Kosala, there are 25 suttas. And the last sutta is the one we are reading today, about the simile of the mountain. So the sutta begins at Savatthi, and of course at Savatthi is an abbreviation. We should understand that this means, thus have I heard, at one time the Buddha was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park, the usual introduction. But because back then in the day, it was very difficult to make paper, and it was difficult to make ink, and people were trying to be very economical, and also it got very tedious to over and over write again the same introduction. So people just abbreviated it, and it is to be understood that at Savatthi should be, expanded to the full introduction. So, as usual, the Buddha was in Anathapindika's monastery, and then in the middle of the day, King Pasenadi of Kosala approached the Blessed One. And again, it is abbreviated. Again, as usual, he bows down to the Buddha, he pays respect, and then he sits down to one side. And the Blessed One said to him as he was sitting to one side, "Now, where are you coming from, great king, in the middle of the day?" Just now, Venerable Sir, I have been engaged in those affairs of kingship, typical for head-anointed Katya kings, so aristocrat kings, who are intoxicated with the intoxication of sovereignty, who are obsessed by greed for sensual pleasures, who have attained stable control in their country, and who rule, having conquered a great sphere of territory on earth. So here, the Buddha is just starting a conversation with Khenpa Senadi. He is asking what he has been doing the whole day or what he has been doing lately. And Khenpa Senadi, of course, tells him what he has been up to. So he is enjoying ruling his country. He enjoys having power. So as he says here, he is intoxicated with sovereignty, so his power or his rulership. And also he is obsessed with sensual pleasures. So we get an idea of his kind of life. So it seems to have been very enjoyable. And of course, back then he was quite a powerful king. So Kosala was one of the two largest kingdoms in that area. So he was like, considered really powerful by the people. Like people really looked up to him. And so he seems to have had a quite enjoyable life, but on the other hand, he also has a bit of right view. So of course, this is not the first time that he has met the Buddha. And so he has a little bit of understanding of the Dhamma already. It's like he understands that there is an intoxication there. He understands that he has an obsession there. So he understands that this isn't fully wholesome, what he's doing there. He understands that he is very, very attached to these things and that isn't good for him. That's why he's phrasing it in this way, that he's obsessed with sensual pleasures. He's intoxicated by the power and so on. So he has an understanding of the Dhamma. He's not completely just, blindly living his daily life. He understands that there is something deeper, and he understands also that as a practitioner, he is not that far advanced because he still has all these intoxications and obsessions. So unlike some people, I mean, we also encounter many other people in the suttas, and they totally overestimate their practice. They haven't made a very deep commitment to the Dhamma. They're not practicing that much, but they think that they are much more advanced than they are. And I think we have all met people who claim that you can indulge in sensual pleasures and so on as long as you are not attached to them. So they claim that they can have all these luxury items and do all these luxury activities and claim that they can do that without being attached. But on the other hand, they're not able to let that go and live a simpler life. So clearly we can see that they are still attached. But like there's so many people who are deluded in that way, thinking that they're not attached when they're actually attached. But here Khenpa Senadi already has some right view, and he says that he can clearly see that he has attachments, that he has these intoxications and these obsessions and so on. So he's quite honest with the Buddha and explains him quite directly where he explains quite directly where he's at, and he doesn't try to make himself better than he actually is. So that's really commendable, and I think that's very important also for practice, that we really are able to assess our own situation so we don't fool ourselves, and so that we can practice appropriately and we don't create more delusion in our mind than what is already there. So, and the Buddha also at this point now thinks that he should probably teach Khenpa Senadi a little bit so that he is able to see a bigger picture and maybe detach a little bit from all his attachments and obsessions and so on. So now the Buddha comes up with a simile. And the Buddha says, "What do you think, great king? Here a man would come to you from the east, one who is trustworthy and reliable. Having approached, he would tell you, 'For sure, great king, you should know this. I'm coming from the east, and there I saw a great mountain, high as the clouds, coming this way, crushing all living beings. Do whatever you think should be done, great king.'" So here, the Buddha comes up with a simile, the simile of the mountain. And he says, imagine that a person comes to you and gives you a report. So obviously back then, since he is the king, that would happen all the time. of course, as the king, he needs to be informed what's going on in the world, what's going on in the various corners of his kingdom, and also in the kingdoms around him. So he would have a lot of messengers coming and going, and people reporting stuff to him. So this would have been a daily occurrence for King Pasenadi, something that is very relatable for him. But the report that he gets this time is quite shocking. So a man or any kind of person, doesn't matter, the gender doesn't matter, and a person that is trustworthy and reliable comes and tells of this really incredible story that there is this mountain, this gigantic mountain, high as the clouds, so as basically as high as you can imagine. And that mountain is moving towards the king and is crushing everything in its wake. So killing lots of people, killing everybody in its wake, but also destroying all the material things, all the land, all the fields, all the buildings, all the infrastructure, all the material possessions of the people. Everything is just being destroyed. All the animals, all the beings. It's just complete disaster. And the mountain is coming, and obviously there's nothing you can do. So humans cannot control mountains. So obviously a man reports what is happening and says, do whatever you think should be done, great king. But on the other hand, it's also clear that even a king that is as powerful as King Pasenadi will not be able to change anything here. So that is the situation that the king is facing at the moment. And then a second person would come to you from the west, and a third one from the north, and a fourth person would come to you from the south. One who's trustworthy and reliable. Having approached, they would tell you, for sure, great king, you should know this. I'm coming from the south, and there I saw a great mountain, high as the clouds, coming this way, crushing all living beings. Do whatever you think should be done, great king. So now the king receives more reports, and mountains are closing in on him from all sides. So you don't have any direction where you can flee. You're completely surrounded by this calamity that is coming towards you and crushing you from all sides. And you have no escape. Like this, you're sure to be annihilated, and everybody you know, everything you know, all your possessions, you're going to lose everything. And then all the other beings are also all going to die. So this is the situation that the king is facing. And I feel like in modern times, a lot of people have felt this way. Obviously not with a mountain, but people feel very, very crushed by various things that are happening in the world. First, there was a pandemic, or there still is a pandemic. So a lot of people have lost everything that was important to them. Many people have lost loved ones, or many people have lost their jobs, have lost their income, have lost their place to live as a result, and they lost their social circle, their friends, because they couldn't meet up anymore. It was very difficult to stay in touch with other people, or with your family even. People felt really like their entire life was turned upside down, and many were even scared for their life, because a pandemic, a virus can just strike at any time, and you don't know if if you're going to survive and what's going to happen. So first there was a pandemic, and a lot of people felt like they were being crushed on all sides, and it was very difficult for many people to cope. And now recently, with the developments in Russia and Ukraine, a war has broken out in Europe. Many people were really, really shocked, and they felt like totally overwhelmed. They weren't prepared for this, and now many people are really scared because the countries are involved in this war that have nuclear weapons. And if you imagine like a nuclear weapon, like this really is like a mountain that might crush all living beings. In the Buddha's time, this was just a simile that couldn't really happen. But in our time, like we are basically surrounded on all sides by countries that have nuclear weapons, and there is enough power that people can actually annihilate this entire planet and destroy life on Earth. So the simile is actually more real now than it was back then. And many people feel very trapped, feel very anxious. since these hostilities have broken out. And for this reason, I thought it was really important to read this sutta and to have a place now where we can discuss if you feel that you have any questions or anything to discuss about this. So this is the simile that the Buddha came up with. And and all these persons report to the king and they say, "Do whatever you think should be done, great king." And so the Buddha asks King Pasenadi of Kosala, "If, great king, such a great peril should arise, such a terrible destruction of human life, the human state being so difficult to obtain, what should be done?" And King Pasenadi says, "If, venerable sir, such a great peril should arise, such a terrible destruction of human life, the human state being so difficult to obtain, what else should be done but to live by the Dhamma, to live righteously, and to do wholesome and meritorious deeds?" So, obviously, here in this situation, there's nothing that the king can actually do in order to stop the mountain. So what is to be done? And King Pasenadi says, well, if you can't do anything to stop the calamity, then what else can you do? You just make the best of the time that you still have. You practice Dhamma, you do wholesome and meritorious deeds. You make the best out of the life or out of the time that you have. And you don't waste your time. You just use whatever time is left to make the most of it, to practice Dhamma, to make merit, to live righteously, to live a good life. That's the only thing you can do in that situation. And so that is King Pasenadi's reflection on the issue. And he also says, the human state is so difficult to obtain. So life is really, really precious as a human. And of course, we know that life is really, life as a human is really precious because it's very difficult to be reborn as a human being. Compared to the mass of other beings that is there, humans are actually quite few and far between. So they're not, compared to all the other places where you could get reborn, getting a human body is not that easy. So when we compare the amount of humans that are there, maybe to the animals, we see that there are massive, so many times more animals than there are humans, especially if you start counting all the insects and so on, which obviously are also beings where we could also be reborn. So there are not that many humans on this planet compared to all the animals. And then if we look at all the other places where you could be reborn, the beings in the hell realms, the pretas, so the people in the ghost realms, and all the heaven realms and so on, then humans are really, really very few. And I think probably most people know that the Buddha gave this simile of the blind turtle that is swimming in the ocean to explain how rare it is to get a human rebirth, especially if you come from a lower realm. And the Buddha said, well, imagine that there is a blind turtle swimming around in the ocean, and that blind turtle only needs to come up to the surface once every 100 years to breathe. So, and in that same ocean, this very, very large, gigantic ocean, there is also a yolk swimming around with a hole in it. So like a plank of wood with a hole in it. And that turtle only comes up once every 100 years to breathe. And so it's already very rare that the turtle breathes at all or comes to the surface at all. And getting a human rebirth is like the probability that the turtle, when it comes up to the surface, would by chance, randomly, come up in that place where that plank is with that hole, and the turtle would put its head through that hole just by chance to breathe. So it's a gigantic ocean, one single plank with one single hole, and that turtle is blind and only comes up once every 100 years. And that probability that the turtle would put its head through that hole, that's the chance that you would get a human rebirth after you're reborn in a lower realm. From a higher realm, the chances are a little bit higher to get a human rebirth, but even then, it's still quite difficult to get a human rebirth. And a human rebirth obviously is very precious because it is a very good place to practice the Dhamma. So in the lower realms, it is not really possible to practice Dhamma because suffering is so intense that you don't have peace of mind enough to actually practice the Dhamma and to understand Dhamma. You're just so much enveloped in pain, and you're just so busy trying to survive. Your mind isn't even capable of understanding Dhamma. So you're not able to practice there. In the higher realms, in the heaven realms, you are technically able to practice, but because it's so pleasurable, it's very difficult to find the motivation to practice. It's very difficult to reflect about suffering when everything is nice. And also your mind doesn't really incline towards quietude. It doesn't really incline towards deep reflections because you're constantly distracted by various sense objects that are very interesting and very pleasurable. So for that reason, human rebirth is really, really very precious. Because here's a good balance. Human minds are clear and sharp enough to understand the Dhamma, not like an animal mind. And also there's enough pleasure and enough suffering. There's enough suffering for us to be interested in overcoming suffering, but not so much that we're totally overwhelmed. And also there is enough possibility for seclusion and quietude for us to withdraw and actually do the practice if we want to. And so human rebirth is really, really very precious. But here in this case, there's human life, even though it is so precious, is just annihilated over and over by these mountains that come crushing in on the king. So King Pasenadi says, well, what else is there to be done but to live by the Dhamma, to live righteously, and to do wholesome and meritorious deeds? And now the Buddha explains the simile, and of course the Buddha was not thinking about wars, and the Buddha was not thinking about a pandemic. The Buddha was thinking about something that's actually much more mundane, but it's also much more dangerous than any of that. It's just we don't really think about it. And so the Buddha says, I inform you, great king, I announce to you, great king, aging and death are rolling in on you. When aging and death are rolling in on you, great king, what should be done? As aging and death are rolling in on me, Venerable Sir, what else should be done but to live by the Dhamma, to live righteously, and to do wholesome and meritorious deeds? So the Buddha was actually thinking about aging and death. So those big mountains that are crushing everything in their wake, this is a simile for aging and death. So with every second that we live, every second of our life, we are 1 second closer to our death. So aging and death come crushing in towards us every second of our life. It's just we don't reflect on this. And aging and death, when they come, they will take away everything that we are attached to. We have to leave everything behind. We have to be separated from our loved ones. We have to be separated from our friends, or our friends and family might actually die first. So it's like the mountain comes and crushes them first before it crushes us. And everything we attach to, our material possessions, everything that we think is now so important to us, our house or any kind of hobbies or any kind of things that we identify with, possessions that we love, all this is going to be crushed by the mountain of death. And even our own body, of course, will have to age and eventually will have to die. So whether there's a pandemic out there, or whether there's a war out there, or whether anything is out there that kind of threatens us, doesn't really matter, because aging and death are coming anyway. Even if you have the most happy, peaceful, blissful life, still aging and death are going to come. So this kind of looming threat is just hanging over our head the whole time. It's just we don't reflect on it properly. When there's a war out there, or when there's a pandemic out there, suddenly we think about that and suddenly we feel threatened. But actually, the death is coming and is there the whole time anyway. So that fear that we have, that some people have now, that many people have now actually, that is something we should really use for our practice, because that will give us a lot of motivation to practice the Dhamma, and as King Pasenadi here says, to do wholesome and meritorious deeds, to make progress in the Dhamma, to do more meditation, to learn more about the suttas, or to help each other, to really make good karma and to look out for each other. And of course, I think many people are familiar with this phenomenon. When things get tough, then suddenly people look out for each other more. They are more friendly towards each other. They take care of each other. Suddenly you keep on checking in with your family members, make sure that your parents are okay, make sure that your friends are okay. Whereas previously, when everything was going smoothly, you didn't really care too much and you were quite self-absorbed and you didn't really call your parents quite as often, or you didn't really put so much value on friendship and on taking care of each other. But when things get tough, then suddenly people remember what is actually important in their life. And if we could actually keep on that reflection and understand that because aging and death are coming, these are the things that are important in our life. And then we wouldn't get so caught up in sense pleasures, and we wouldn't get so distracted with material things. And it would be so much easier to actually practice the Dhamma. And then King Pasenadi shares some more of his reflections about the simile, and he says, "There are, Venerable Sir, elephant battles fought by head-anointed Khattiya kings who are intoxicated with the intoxication of sovereignty, who are obsessed by greed for sensual pleasures, who have attained stable control in their country, and who rule having conquered a great sphere of territory on earth. But there is no place for those elephant battles, no scope for them when aging and death are rolling in. There are, Venerable Sir, cavalry battles, there are chariot battles, and there are infantry battles fought by head-anointed Khattiya kings and so on that are intoxicated and obsessed. But there is no place for those infantry battles, no scope for them when aging and death are rolling in." So King Pasenadi is reflecting on his various parts of an army. So back then in the day, it was what is called a fourfold army, so 4 divisions of an army, and those 4 divisions were like the elephant troops, the cavalry, the chariot troops, and the infantry. And so every proper kingdom or any kind of country needed to have these four parts or 4 divisions of an army to defend themselves. And of course, when something happens and we are threatened, then the first thing that people usually think is we need to defend ourselves. We need to have a bigger and better army with more equipment, with better weapons and stronger missiles. And we need to go to space to put whatever missiles in space and stuff like that. And we need to build bigger bombs. And people think, like, when they are fearful, they think there's security in an army and in those weapons. And they feel like if they had a stronger army, then they would be safe and secure and peaceful. So this is the first thing that people turn to. They look for something outside, another material thing, more weapons, more bombs, and so on, to provide safety. But actually, as King Pasenadi reflects here, this doesn't provide any kind of safety at all, because even the biggest missile cannot help you when aging and death come. So this isn't really helpful. And even in worldly terms, bigger and better missiles or bombs or a stronger army isn't really that helpful. Like, we already, like, in the world, we already have armies that have amazing weapons. We have nuclear weapons that can blow up this planet many times over. We can destroy the entire Earth. And still we have wars. Like, still we don't live in peace. So people always thought that if we build nuclear weapons, there isn't going to be any war, because everybody will just be too scared to fight against each other. So they would actually protect us. But now we already have another war with a country that actually does have nuclear weapons. So it hasn't stopped any war from occurring. And actually, we don't need any bigger weapons, because we already can destroy the planet, but still it hasn't provided any kind of safety for us. So even in worldly terms, this doesn't really help. But of course, when we think about aging and death, then obviously there's nothing you can do with any kind of weaponry. And then King Pasenadi has another thought, and he continues, "In this royal court, Venerable Sir, there are counselors who, when the enemy arrives, are capable of dividing them by subterfuge. But there is no place for those battles of subterfuge, no scope for them when aging and death are rolling in." So another method how you could defeat any danger that is coming your way is by being very clever, very smart, like outsmarting the danger. Here, King Pasenadi says using subterfuge, so tricking them somehow, creating some kind of illusion to somehow deflect that danger. There are some other translations. In some other translations, the word that is translated as subterfuge here is translated as magic. So if you have magic powers, you could defeat your enemy. The Pali word is manta, which is, I think, related to the Sanskrit word mantra. So mantras can be spells or incantations. So using some kind of magic spell to get your way to protect yourself. But even that can eventually not stop aging and death from coming. So being very smart, you can outsmart other enemies, but you cannot outsmart aging and death. And then King Pasenadi has another idea, and he says, in this royal court, Venerable Sir, there exists abundant bullion and gold, stored in vaults and depositories. And with such wealth, we are capable of mollifying the enemies when they come. But there is no place for those battles of wealth, no scope for them when aging and death are rolling in. So another method that people like to use to feel safe and secure is to accumulate a lot of money, accumulate a lot of wealth, and they think they can buy their way out of any danger, and they just need to spend more money to solve any kind of problem that will come their way. And again, even in worldly terms, that doesn't really work, because if a pandemic comes or a war comes, then all your wealth doesn't help you. So a nuclear bomb will not make any difference between rich people and poor people. It would just blow everybody up. And also a virus doesn't make any difference between rich people and poor people. It can infect anyone. So, yeah. So we always take safety or take refuge in things outside, either in armies or violence or these kind of protections, or in people who are very smart, trying to outsmart the other one, or in money or in wealth and material possessions. But nothing of this actually works even for most of the big worldly dangers, much less for things like aging and death, which are sure to come our way sooner or later. So King Pasenadi says, as aging and death are rolling in on me, Venerable Sir, what else should be done to live by the Dhamma, to live righteously, and to do wholesome and meritorious deeds? And the Buddha agrees and says, so it is, great king, so it is, great king. As aging and death are rolling in on you, what else should be done but to live by the Dhamma, to live righteously, and to do wholesome and meritorious deeds? This is what the Blessed One said. Having said this, the Fortunate One, the teacher, further said this. So now there is a small verse or a gatha or some stanzas that are following. So let's read through them as well. Just as mountains of solid rock, massive, reaching to the sky, might draw together from all sides, crushing all in the four quarters, so aging and death come rolling over living beings. Katyas, Brahmins, Vesas, Sudras, Chandalas, and scavengers. They spare none along the way, but come crushing everything. So Katyas are the noble, like aristocratic people. Brahmins, I think, is clear. Vesas, these are merchants, or these are craftsmen. And then Sudras, those are workers and also farmers and those kind of people. So these are the four classes of the ancient Indian society. And then Chandalas, those are untouchable people. Like these are the lowest, considered the lowest in the social hierarchy of ancient India. And scavengers, so they spare none along the way, but come crushing everything. So no matter what kind of class you belong to, you will be crushed by aging and death anyway. There's no ground there for elephant troops, for chariot troops and infantry. One can't defeat them by subterfuge or buy them off by means of wealth. Therefore, a person of wisdom here, out of regard for his own good, Steadfast should settle faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. When one conducts oneself by Dhamma with body, speech, and mind, they praise one here in the present life, and after death, one rejoices in heaven. So this is the simile of the mountain, and I hope it was beneficial for you to have a few reflections about this and about the current situation in the world. Now, if you have any questions or comments, you can type them in the live chat and I will see if I can answer them. So a lot of people are sending Anjalis. That's nice. Somebody is from Bangladesh. Welcome. Thank you for joining in. Nice to see you. Haven't seen any questions so far. Only one question so far from Deepak. And he asks, what is the purpose of our life on earth according to Buddhism? So according to Buddhism, the best way to use a life on earth, a human life, is to practice Dhamma. And the purpose of practicing Dhamma is to overcome all suffering and to attain Nibbana. So we are not looking for a better rebirth in a higher realm or anything, because we think that rebirth is cyclical. So you can get reborn in a higher realm, but that is also not eternal. Eventually, that life as a god or a deva will be over and you will fall back down into realms where there is a lot of suffering. So the purpose of a human life, if you want to make your human life count, then you should cultivate wholesome deeds and practice Dhamma so you can eventually overcome this round of rebirth. And if you choose not to practice the Dhamma, then of course you still have a human life and you still make karma, and that will just lead you to a rebirth somewhere else. So if you don't practice Dhamma and if you don't attain Nibbana, you will just be stuck in this endless cycle of rebirths forever. For that reason, the purpose is to try as best as you can to get out of this cycle of rebirths. And the way to do that is the Noble Eightfold Path that the Buddha taught. So that seems to have been the one and only question so far. So we can finish a little early today, I think. It was nice to see so many people online, especially I think quite a few people have joined from Asia. That's really nice. And Sud has posted a question. And they say, I feel like time is our mountain, but although reflecting death does cause us to get real with practice, this is only brief in my case. I keep forgetting and get lax. Why is this so? Well, it's because of delusion in your mind and because your attachment to sense pleasures is very strong, in the same way that it was very strong for King Pasenadi. And he, even though he was hearing a lot of teachings from the Buddha personally, he kept on being intoxicated with his power and being obsessed with his sensual pleasures. So it means that your wisdom faculty isn't strong enough and your mindfulness isn't strong enough yet. That's why you keep on forgetting what is actually important in your life, and you keep on forgetting what the actual priorities should be, and you get constantly distracted by other stuff. So the way to overcome this is to really deeply reflect and contemplate what are the actual priorities in life, what is really, really important. And sometimes it takes a terrible event to really shake us out of our complacency. So a pandemic could do that, a war could do that, like personal disaster in your personal life could do that. And for some people, they don't really need this. All they need is to read a sutta or to hear a Dhamma talk and reflect a little bit and then understand what the priorities are. And really, make it very real for you and You can even write it down, what is important to you. Just, once you fix it on paper, it becomes more real. It becomes more tangible than just something that pops up in your mind and then kind of fades away again. Some people try to read suttas every day. Some people, write little snippets of suttas that are inspiring or that are reminding them of what is important. Write it in their notebook, put it on their home screen of their smartphone, post it on a post-it on the wall, or post a post-it on their laptop, or wherever you will just see it all the time, so that you are constantly reminded of what is actually important. And you use these external sort of aids to help you keep on track and help you not to forget what is really, really important for you, until your wisdom becomes strong enough that you don't need those external cues anymore. And you just naturally remember all the time. And you remain sort of focused on the Dhamma while doing other stuff in life also. So this is the trick to get your wisdom to wake up a little bit, and your mindfulness to become a little bit more strong. Use those external reminders so that you don't lose your focus and don't get too much obsessed or too much distracted by attachments and distractions. So do I think that meditation helps, and how much should a layperson meditate each day? How much time to spend on the 4 protective meditations? Well, meditation helps to some extent, depending on what kind of meditation you do. But in that situation, the most important thing is contemplation. So of course you can do contemplation in your meditation. So when you contemplate, you develop wisdom and you understand what is really important in your life. So you can, for example, contemplate on this simile of the mountain. If you just do breath meditation, then that will calm down your mind, but it might not necessarily develop wisdom, or it might develop wisdom in the long run, but what you actually need is to develop wisdom in the short run, so you don't keep on forgetting what is important to you. So contemplation practices would help more than just samatha meditations in that situation. How much time do I think a layperson should meditate each day? It really depends on the layperson. It also depends on how they live the rest of their life. So meditation itself is only helpful it is much more helpful if you restructure the rest of your life, if you have a fairly calm lifestyle, if you practice at least the 5 precepts in your daily life, if you're not too stressed out, if you're not too busy otherwise. And also, what other kind of practices are you doing? Are you reading suttas? Do you do any chanting? Do you go to your local monastery? Do you meet with other Dhamma practitioners? Do you do other wholesome activities? Do you help each other out, or do you do any kind of social work or social services, or what other kind of things are you doing in your daily life? How much do you focus on the Dhamma in the rest of your life? How much can you be mindful on Dhamma or on what is important to your life while you are engaging in your daily activities? And depending on that, it will depend on how much you can actually meditate, and also how much meditation would be beneficial. And also how much time you need to spend on the 4 protective meditations is very individual. There are lots of people who don't do the 4 protective meditations at all, and other people only do that practice. So it is really very, very individual. Okay, so we have a lot of people here who are asking all sorts of questions that are not related to the suttas. So I will still answer them because we have a lot of time today, but maybe we'll do that a little bit brief. I can't practice meditation by sitting. How can I practice through walking? So walking meditation should be done in a place where there is not too much external distraction. So a place that is very quiet and calm. Even doing it outdoors can be very difficult because there is a lot of distractions, and often if you're doing it alone and if you're not very skilled, it can just turn into just going for a walk and enjoying nature or something. So when you do walking meditation, it's very, very important to remain focused on yourself. So that can be the touch of your feet against the ground. Focusing on that. It can be focusing on the breathing, but don't look around and don't enjoy the scenery and don't chat with other people and stuff like that. So just focus on your body and remain with your mindfulness really well established inside yourself. And someone else asks how to overcome hindrances during meditation. It depends on the hindrance. There are different methods for different hindrances. If your main hindrance is greed, then practicing generosity is very important. Also practicing contentment, like practicing generosity in your daily life will be very, very important. Also practicing renunciation in your daily life will be very, very important. And during meditation, practicing contentment will be the main issue. If your hindrance is anger, then practicing kindness in your daily life will be very important. Establishing really good relationships with other people, doing things for others, being caring, stuff like that. And then in your meditation, doing Brahma Vihara practice, so especially metta practice, loving kindness practice is the best. But all these practices in meditation only work if you also practice the same qualities in your daily life. So as I mentioned, for the greed types, giving is important. For the hate types, kindness is important. For other hindrances, sleepiness, for example, can be helpful to focus on light. So make sure your room is brightly lit. Make sure you sleep enough. Walking meditation can be good. If your main hindrance is restlessness, then the opposite, sit in a dark room, a calm room. Make sure your daily life isn't too busy. Make sure you're not too stressed out in your daily life. So your daily life is already fairly calm. That way restlessness calms down a little bit. And then focus on the breathing to deal with restlessness. If your main hindrance is doubt, then you need to cultivate more faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. That means reading more suttas, meeting with other practitioners, exchanging on Dhamma, understanding and learning more. So these are the main ways to overcome the 5 hindrances, I think. So it really depends which hindrance you're struggling with. Or it might be a different hindrance each day. So then you need to use a different method each day. So, and that was the last question for today. So thank you very much for joining in. It was good to see so many people. And we will finish for today with 3 sadhus as usual. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I will see you all next week. So next week will be 8 a.m. New York time as usual for people who are in Europe. That will still be 1 hour early. So that will still be at 1 p.m. Central European time. And have a good week. And I will see you all then.